Good. You know, applause for National Geographic, our sponsor for that reception. They did a fantastic job, I think. Oh, we have 5 more minutes. You know, in those 5 more minutes, how many Europeans in this audience? Any French? No French, only American English-speaking people? This will be fun. I'm going to try to teach you to say Kuiperbelt, the way it's supposed to pronounce. Do you think you can manage? No. It's a Dutch name by a good Dutchman, like Huygens, also a really nice name to pronounce, but that's double difficult. It's the ui and the g. I will not try that. Let's start with Kuiper. Anyone can say the word fauteuil, the word for comfy chair in French. Fauteuil, say after me, fauteuil, try, fauteuil, fauteuil. So the ui sound is not completely right, but close enough. So keep that going, fauteuil, fauteuil. Then you can say Kuiper, fauteuil, Kuiper, Kuiper. You'll be proud, you know, you'll be the only few in America will be able to say that name the way it's supposed to be pronounced. You know, that's actually one of the reasons why we didn't think to land in the Huygens crater, which is really near the Copernicus crater. Because if we land in the Huygens crater in 2033, there will be about 30 million of the 8 billion people on Earth that will be able to pronounce it. We think that's bad PR. So, Copernicus it is, right? People are still coming in. Like I said, that reception was too good. Copernicus? Copernicus. Easy. Copernicus. Of course, you know, I'm Dutch. And according to the Vatican, the Dutch are the only people on Earth that know how to pronounce Latin, which I think is a really strange compliment coming from the Vatican. But it's true, that's what they tell you, and it's true also. I had 16 years of Latin. By that time, you can read Latin as if it is a dirty magazine. It's really fun once you are in that level. I also had 16 years of Greek. So if anyone says that's Greek to me, I can only say no. It's Chinese to me, no. I mean, I always have to look what language it's to me. There are quite a number of that's not a problem. Being European, do you have any idea how small the Netherlands is? From where I live, it takes 3 hours and a half hour, perhaps, to drive to Paris. Mostly because there's a lot of traffic on the road, or I could do it faster. Also, I'm not allowed to do it that fast, it's not Germany. I'm driving through Belgium, so, you know, they have some laws and regulations about speed. And so, yeah, it's only, I think, it's 1,400 kilometers from where I live. That's, you know, less than 1,000 miles to Rome. You know, Europe isn't really that big. It's just the way we present our planet. Have you seen the map where the south of the planet's on top and the north of the planet is below? And then suddenly you realize that Europe isn't actually that big. So that's why if you live in the Netherlands, which is 150 kilometers wide, so that's 100 miles wide, and 300 miles long, and that's only at the longest points and the widest points, it's nothing. It's just, you know, there are 17 million people there, and our roads aren't wide enough, or you would be in Germany or in Belgium within an hour. It's not that far. Anyone in? Can I start introducing Rick? Rick says I can, so I will. mean, who am I to say nay? You know, I looked over Rick's accomplishments, Rick Tumlinson, of course, I'm talking about, over his lifetime. And there's one thing that, you know, screams at you. It screams space. It screams pushing the envelope at you. Rick has established, founded, been part of so many organizations that try to push us out there into space, that it would take 20 minutes to just name them, which I won't do because I'm not allowed to. And so, in short, of course, at the moment it says, you know, he is, in your program, he is the founder of the New Worlds Institute. But he has been, you know, part of ExploreMars, Space Frontier Foundation, Texas Space Alliance, you know, Deep Space Industries, you name it. Rick has his name there, or to be more precise, their name is in Rick's file. And it means something in our group to have that on your resume. So, having Rick doing this discussion, I think it's a great idea. Let's give the floor to Rick and let him dazzle us. Get us into space, Rick.
Yay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome to the revolution. So, we're going to have some fun today. You're going to have to bear with us. We're going to make up a little of this as we go. Let's see if I can get that first slide up. Isn't it amazing that AV never works at space conferences? So I'll go back to the beginning. There we are. So my name is Rick, and I am going to be your moderator tonight. So first, I'm going to take a couple of minutes, get my own little plug in. And so I have a company, Deep Space Industries. We're very proud of the fact we just announced our partnership last week with the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. And we're going to be launching our first spacecraft probably the end of next year, moving out towards the asteroids after that. The interesting thing about the spacecraft is it runs on water. And then interesting things will start to happen. Now, I do have an organization called the New Worlds Institute. We're having a conference in Austin in the fall. And if you guys have never been to Austin, you got to come. This is going to be a conference. It's going to be an interesting time. Now, the conference that we do is going to be focused primarily on the culture and technology of space, right? I've spent a long time arguing with people about what kind of car we're going to take to Disneyland. This conference is about what happens at Disneyland. So I want you to come to that. Now, people say to me, well, Rick, you're an asteroid guy. No. I actually, as another friend of mine once said, I'm pretty well gender neutral when it comes to heavenly bodies. And then I thought about what that meant. But I did a book on Return to the Moon, and in fact, I gave my friend Bob here, helped get him some money to get started. We gave him $100K, and that's the FINDS logo, Foundation for the International Non-Government Development of Space. And that was one of the things we're really proud to be able to say we helped start the Mars Society. As recently as last year, I was able to bring together 100 people, locked them in a room, gave them some free food, told them they couldn't argue about launch vehicles. And we had a bunch of the leadership here at the Reagan Center. And this was the statement that came out of that event. The long-term goal of the human spaceflight and exploration program of the United States is to expand permanent human presence beyond low Earth orbit in a way that will enable human settlement and a thriving space economy. Now, this was people from across the spectrum, aerospace, NASA, all kinds of places, working together. We had 99 out of 100 people vote on the consensus, and the one person who didn't was a new consultant to the field, and she was being a little bit timid. So we're going to go. We're going to go out, and the question is it going to be like this? Or maybe that's the United Nations flag or everybody's flag, whatever it is. Or is it going to be like this? Going to be private companies getting there first? We don't know. So the question today is Mars. When? When are we going to go? Now, the presenters today are Joe Cassady over in this corner. Joe's the executive director of space for Aerojet Rocketdyne. All right. Now, since I have the flu and I'm involved in planetary protection, I really take that seriously. We will bow. There we are. Coming in this corner, and he couldn't stop himself from coming in early because it's Bob Zubrin, president of the Pioneer Energy and founder of the Mars Society. Bob, you're a brave man. All right, I know which side you stand on. So, we're gonna have some fun with this, and this is the question. Have a seat, gentlemen. When should we land on Mars? The rules, which will last as long as first contact with any enemy ever does, will be a 10-minute opening statements, 5-minute rebuttals, questions from the floor, that is, you, 1-minute answers, 1-minute rebuttals, and 2-minute closing statements, or closing statement from me. So here it goes. When are we going to go to Mars? So gentlemen, I'm looking for the coin, which I've already lost.
Aren't we supposed to settle this by a quick round of speed chess?
We could arm wrestle. No, here we are. I found it. Yeah. This not being the Star Trek universe, we actually do use coins. So, who's going to call? Bob, you want to call it? Heads or tails?
Heads.
It's heads?
Okay, he goes first.
Ow! And, sir, you are on. Please take the podium for your statements and rebuttals, and then we'll go to free form later on.
Okay, very good. What is your name? Oh, yes, Artemis. Aphrodite. Mighty Aphrodite. Hello, everyone. Is that Mom? How did you get here? Hang on just a second. I know I'm burning time, but it's okay. So, thank you, Rick. Nice to see you, Robert, worthy opponent. We were asked to speak today on when should we land on Mars, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share my thoughts with this conference of bright people, all of whom share an interest in the exploration of Mars. So, here goes. Oh, without further ado. Anybody want to put a bet on it? All right, drum roll. The first landing date is April 2033. Launch of the crew is September 2032, 231 days in advance of that landing date. That launch date is a little bit over 16 years away. Let me tell you why I think that's reasonable. If you look at it, there's a wide spectrum of suggested approaches for going to Mars. On the one end, we have things like Mars Direct, joined more recently by Mars One, quite a bit less credibly, I would say, and possibly by others, such as Elon Musk. These approaches favor a simple, straightforward, and soon approach that I call the triple S. In the middle, we have the incremental, evolvable approach, which is now being embraced by many within NASA, industry, and academia. This approach recognizes risks or knowledge gaps, which must be systematically retired, and proposes a campaign of missions that accomplish this. It also develops and introduces new technology where appropriate, and stays within a budget that can be politically sustained. At such time as the risks are sufficiently retired, the first missions to Mars are then undertaken. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have those who favor the wait until we have a better way to go plans. They cite the great step in difficulty posed by Mars expeditions and suggest that we should wait until we have better solutions before we even start thinking about Mars. So today I'm going to argue for the middle approach. While I share the passion and the impatience of many who favor the triple S, my inner engineer just sees too many hurdles. And while I also agree with those who say we need to adopt a more risk-tolerant posture akin to what we were willing to take in the 1960s. I think the downside of reckless missions that squander the lives of brave crew would be a loss of support and questioning from the public and policymakers who we will rely on for support. And make no mistake, any human Mars mission or campaign of missions will require the support of governments. Governments, plural, for many years. There's a common misperception abroad today that private parties could attempt this historic undertaking without any assistance, and this is far from true. No one with an understanding of the problem believes that. Mars is a challenge that will take a commitment of resources and political will that is unprecedented. But it is also a challenge that will marshal the best of our common capabilities. Let's take a look at the example of the space station. It was possible to get the United States and Russia, the old Cold War adversaries, to come together with other partners from all parts of the world to accomplish and sustain this project over a period of some 20 years. Mars can benefit from this example. There were many years when it was not fashionable to speak of Mars, especially where human missions were involved. I can remember as a young engineer being allowed to attend the Mars conference here in Washington, D.C. in 1986 on the 10th anniversary of the Viking landings. You see, our company had built the terminal descent engines for NASA, and by then I was already a confirmed Martian. However, when I went back and reported to my bosses that Mars was where it was at for the future, they looked at me like I really was from Mars. So that wasn't going over at that time. But undaunted, many of us, including Robert, continued to think about what needed to be done and to pursue advances through whatever means were available. Some of that involved leveraging commercial funding and industry investment, together with government funding, to advance technologies that we knew would be useful later for Mars. For instance, solar electric propulsion was adopted and used by commercial satellites, and that allowed us to accomplish most of the development to prove the concept of moving large satellites around in Earth orbit. Today, more than 200 communication satellites fly some form of electric propulsion. So it's a proven technology that can be scaled up for use on Mars cargo tugs. So when people tell you the idea of commercial government partnerships is a new thing, don't believe them. As many folks probably realize, the great hurdle for any Mars campaign is the sheer amount of stuff that has to be raised off of the Earth into orbit. Due to the vast distances that have to be covered in getting from the Earth to Mars, this problem is compounded. That leads to even greater amounts of propellant being launched at the same high cost as the good stuff. So based on the available technologies, we have recently evaluated an architecture that split the crew and the cargo to reduce the mass of that overall manifest. Several of these come into play. I mentioned solar electric propulsion for cargo transfer. Another is in situ resource utilization for consumables and possible propellant production at Mars. That approach, combined with a heavy lifter that can place large cargo blocks into high Earth orbits, the SLS, and a capable crew vehicle, the Orion, provides us with the key elements that we need to accomplish deep space missions. The resultant study by our company and others done by NASA and industry have found that it's possible to reduce the mass that has to be launched by greater than 50%. This results in a commensurate cost savings, and it's made it possible to structure the plans for an approach that would fit within the current NASA human spaceflight budget adjusted for inflation. There's no need to reprogram funds from other parts of the budget. There's no need to have large increases in the NASA budget, as was done during Apollo. And this plan provides a sustainable approach that will allow us to continue to fly missions that will build an outpost on Mars by the middle of this century. Thank you for your time, and let's go to Mars.
Okay, I'd like to thank Rick for that $100,000 and you for coming to this conference, not only hear what I have to say, but everyone has to say, and for your interest in this subject, because I think the future ages will regard this subject as the most important subject people in this time are talking about. I don't believe that people 500 years from now are going to know or care which gang of mobsters came out on top in Syria or similar places. But just like we remember Columbus Act in 1492 and not the Borgias taking over the papacy, which also occurred in 1492, so this is what they will care about from our present age. And so I commend you for being interested in this instead of all of the many distractions that abound for our attention. Now, when should we land on Mars? You know, there are people who say the 2040s. Joe says the 2030s. Well, let's look at this. Frankly, despite all the difficulties, real, exaggerated, or simply imagined, that stand in the way of sending humans to Mars, the fact of the matter is we are much closer today from a technological point of view to sending humans to Mars than America was to send men to the moon in 1961, and they were there 8 years later. So given the will, we could do the same. If the next president was to start a humans to Mars program that was serious after inauguration, okay, we could be landing on Mars. Well, we certainly could be taking off for Mars and by the end of her second term. Okay? And then landing in the spring of 2025, I would say April 9th, because that will be my birthday, so I would like that to happen then. And it is within the window. Now, how can I say this? You've heard about all sorts of things for Mars missions. You sometimes have seen images of gigantic nuclear electric spacecraft assembled on orbit in floating spaceports and all the rest of this. And clearly none of that is going to be happening by the mid-20s. But that, as I will show in my talk on Thursday morning, in which I will lay out the plan known as Mars Direct, which if you want to get a detailed picture of, I have a little book on this subject. A few copies happen to show up by accident, I don't know. But you buy them, I'll sign them, it's a win-win situation. But that kind of stuff is not needed. Okay, what is needed to send humans to Mars is a transportation system capable of transporting a small group of people from the surface of the Earth to the surface of Mars, and then sending either that or a comparable payload back. So it's not about realizing the vision of the giant science fiction spaceship, it's about sending payloads. Now, let's look at what we actually did in Apollo. We developed hydrogen, oxygen rocket engines, multi-stage heavy lift launch vehicles, in-space life support, spacesuits, space power systems ranging from fuel cells to solar panels and radioisotope generators, orbital rendezvous techniques, soft landing techniques, re-entry techniques, deep space navigation, deep space communication, nuclear rocket engines. We developed the entire bag of tricks that is necessary to go to Mars. And people today talk about, well, you know, it's really hard to go to Mars. We're going to need bigger parachutes than we currently have. Well, sure, okay, we do. But that is not a comparable development to what we did in Apollo. And I mean, frankly, to say that we are unable to take on this much smaller challenge within a comparable time frame is saying that we have become much less than the kind of people we used to be. And that is something that this country cannot afford. I mean, frankly, it means an acceptance of American decline. We cannot afford that. Now, people say, well, we don't have the money. Well, that is simply untrue, okay? If people point to the fact that in Apollo, the NASA budget was as much as 4% of the federal budget. It averaged over the period perhaps 2% of the federal budget compared to NASA's budget today, which is, like 0.6% of the federal budget. But that is because the federal budget was much smaller. In inflation-adjusted dollars, NASA's budget today in the range of $18 billion a year. If you take the NASA budget from 1961 to 1973, transform it into today's dollars, divide by 13, you come out to around $21 billion a year. So they're of the same order of magnitude. One is not 4 times the other, okay? So the reason why it was a much larger fraction of the federal budget, a much larger fraction of GNP, is because the nation was much poorer then, okay? And that can hardly be cited as an advantage for them, okay? Now, why is it important that we go to Mars? I mean, there's a number of reasons here. Some have been mentioned today. There is the science. Okay, Mars is the Rosetta Stone for letting us know the truth about the prevalence and diversity of life in the universe. Okay, it had a warm and wet planet, liquid water for 5 times as long as it took life to appear on Earth after there was liquid water here. And so if the conjecture is true that life is a natural development from chemistry, wherever you have appropriate physical and chemical conditions, life should have appeared on Mars and on the thousands, millions, billions of other planets that we now know to exist in the galaxy, because most stars we know now have planets. Every star has a habitable zone, so a substantial fraction of stars are going to have planets in their habitable zone, and life will be everywhere. If we don't find it, and you need to have humans to do this, okay, then there could be a miracle or an element of free chance involved in the development of life. We could be alone. This is something thinking men and women have wondered about for thousands of years. We go for the challenge. Civilizations are like people. We grow and we challenge ourselves. The Human to Mars program will be a tremendous bracing challenge to our society, and particularly to our youth. Youth loves adventure. This would say to every young person in this country, learn your science. You could be a pioneer in new worlds. That's how we're going to get a new generation of scientists, inventors, engineers, doctors, medical researchers, technological entrepreneurs, the kind of people that move our society forward. We are not going to get these people by testing the kids to death, my friends. Okay, you get them by inspiring them. Okay, and then there is the future. Okay, if we do this in our time, this is what our time will be remembered for. If we go to Mars 500 years from now, there will not only be a branch, maybe 10 branches of human civilization on Mars. There will be thousands of branches of human civilization on planets orbiting stars in this reach of the galaxy. And what will they remember of this time? And then finally, returning to this time. Okay, this time is important too. And what's going on right now in the world? We're being challenged. We're being challenged in a way that we weren't being challenged since, well, Kennedy announced the Apollo program. We're being challenged by Putin, by the Chinese, by the Islamists. They're all saying, yeah, you free societies, you've gone soft, you've gone decadent, you're in the past, you're headed towards the trash can, goodbye. Okay, we are the future. Okay, we will bury you, as Khrushchev pointed out. Okay, but what did we do? We did Apollo. We astounded the world with what free people can do. And I'll tell you something, when Buzz landed on the moon, you know where I was? I was in Leningrad, okay? And every Russian I knew came up to me and said, "Молодец," it's like, attaboy, okay? They understood that this was the team they wanted to get on. The leadership may have been having kittens, but the people understood, okay? And this is the message we need to send the world, that we are not done, that we are not going to go softly into that good night, okay? This is what we need to do. We need to do it for ourselves. We need to do it for the world, okay? And that's why we have to do it now. Now, if we say, oh, we're going to do this in the 2040s, we're not saying that we're going to do it. We're saying we're not going to do it. We're saying, oh, we hope somebody else will do it. It's an abdication of responsibility. With respect, if we say we're doing it in the 2030s, what we're saying is we hope that someone in the 2020s starts such a program. Okay? If you're going to do it, you do it. Okay? I think we should do it, and I think we should get started in 2017. Humans to Mars is not a task for the next generation. It's a task for the next administration. Thank you.
Wow. I am absolutely astounded that both of our presenters ended before their time was up. Let's see if we can continue that. I probably just jinxed it. Joe, if you'd like to go offer a rebuttal. And we'll come back for this in a minute. Yeah, go ahead. You got 5 minutes up there. Oh, 5 minutes. 5 minutes at the podium. We'll use the hand mics for the Q&A later. Okay.
5 more minutes. So a couple of comments. The first thing, and I have to tell Bob that I actually did go back and brush up on my Mars Direct, reading the case for Mars again. It's been a few years. I think that when I look back at that work that you did in the 90s with Dave Baker and the gang at Martin Marietta, I see a lot of what you did in what we're trying to do today. So the influence that that work had on that generation of folks that is now trying to pull this plan together is immense. And things like ISRU, obviously. Where I differ, I think, is in a couple of points. In terms of the budget argument, it's true that the GDP, the federal budgets have all changed over the time period from the 60s till now. Unfortunately, something else has changed, and that is that we've gone further into debt as a country. And that is what leads our lawmakers and our policymakers to question whether we can continue discretionary spending at the kinds of rates that we've done in the past for things like the space program. It isn't so much about the ratios between then and now. It's more about the situation now versus the situation then. I think the other point that I would make is in terms of the urgency, I completely, as I said earlier, I completely agree and share the feeling and the passion that you have that we need to get going. I would postulate to this group, this audience, that we are going. We've been going. We've started with things like Scott Kelly's mission on the space station over the past year. And we're learning a lot that we need to know in terms of sending crews to Mars. With what we did on Apollo, as impressive as it was in that short time that we went, we never were out beyond the radiation belts for more than a week or two at a time. We have to go to Mars, and as I said earlier, that transit time for that 2033 flight is going to be 231 days. You're exposed to galactic cosmic radiation that entire time. Galactic cosmic radiation is not easily shielded. You're basically going to get a dose. And the question is, is that tolerable? Is that something we can do? Well, we need to learn a little bit more. And it's not just the human beings themselves, it's the systems that have to support the human beings. Right now on the space station, they're taking cultures on the walls. They're looking at what are the bugs that are growing along the walls. Any of you guys ever look in your shower and do that for a science experiment and culture what's growing in the shower at home? I don't know if anybody's ever done that. It's kind of an enlightening experience. Put that combined with microgravity effects and radiation effects, we just don't know. We don't know what's going to happen in those ecosystems. Somebody said earlier this morning at the conference that we did a lot of ground testing before we flew the first one on the station. When we put it up on the station, it broke within a few weeks because of the microgravity differences. So we got to go out there. We got to go out into cislunar space, and we've got to test those systems that we're going to use to go to Mars. Because if we put that crew on the trajectory to Mars and something breaks, they can't just turn around and come back. And they're not just 3 days away, as we were in Apollo. They are months and months away. So there's a few differences. There's a few things that I think we need to really think soberly about. But I'm all for going, and I'm all for starting. And as I said, we have started. We're building hardware. We're testing engines at Stennis right now. We're going to be launching crews here in just a few more years. And we'll do those test missions, we'll do those shakedown cruises, and we'll be ready by the end of the decade of the 20s to launch that first mission. In fact, the cargo for that first mission that I mentioned earlier will probably launch in 2028 or 2029, and it'll be launched and taken out ahead of the crew with a solar electric tug. So it's not that far away. I'll conclude with that. Thank you.
Great. Bob?
NASA, or really the administration which directs NASA, currently has no Mars plan. They put up a chart and they show going to Mars, in the next generation, and they show a variety of activities which they claim are contributing to this goal, but that is not how things are proceeding. Okay? If you were a manager assigned to design and carry out a Humans to Mars program, and you were told you have this much time and this much money, would you spend, pick a number, 5 billion of it on a mission to move a 10-foot diameter, 500-ton boulder from interplanetary space into lunar orbit? Okay? This is not on the critical path. This is a random act which is supported by its own constituency, which then attempts to present a rationale, not a reason, a rationale for how this fits in with the nominal objective of Humans to Mars. If you want to compare the kind of space program we need to have, which is the kind that we had in Apollo, to the kind we have now, the Apollo mode versus the current random mode, I ask you to consider two couples, each wanting to design their own dream house. Couple number one talks about the kind of house they'd like to have. Then they bring in an architect, he does some sketches, they find the one they like, they bring in an engineer, designs it, you bring in a construction crew, they build it. Couple number two, the random mode couple, goes cruising garage sales every weekend, buying parts of houses that appeal to them. Some aluminum siding, some Doric columns, a fountain with a statue of Napoleon in the middle, and they take these things home and they pile them up in the backyard, and then when Pa-in-law comes and sees this pile of junk, he says, "Why do you have this pile of junk in your backyard?" Okay, and they say, "Well, this is to build our dream house." He said, "I'd like to see your plan for this dream house." And so they hire an architect and they say, "We want you to design a plan for a house and it has to include all of these parts." Okay? And so you get a totally fantastical design for a plan, which of course is never built because it's unbuildable. That's what we have now with a Mars program, which is designed to be as complex as possible, moving payloads from Phobos to Deimos and, and what have you, and rocks to L2 or someplace like that. This is nonsense. Okay? Now, so we got to have a plan. Now, you have to understand, wasting money is wasting lives. We're building an SLS. It's going to cost $3 billion a year to maintain the workforce to keep that SLS functioning. Thing's going to fly the first time late this decade, and then we're going to use it to fly humans to Mars in 2035. So we're going to pay $3 billion a year for 20 years to do nothing with this thing. Okay, except for exercises that we somehow invent to give it an excuse for being. This is wasting lives because this money, it is true what they say, the social impact people. This money could be spent on other things that are quite useful. You could spend it on highway repairs. Every $3 million spent on highway repairs saves a life. $3 billion would save 1,000 lives. Wasting 20 years is killing 20,000 people to delay this mission. And as far as the particular thing that Joe mentioned here, the radiation issue, this is untrue. The radiation level, the cosmic ray level in low Earth orbit is half of that in interplanetary space, because the Earth's magnetic field does not block out billion-volt particles. The Earth blocks out half the sky. And so if you have a crew in the space station for a year, they get as much cosmic ray dose as you would have in a Trans-Mars ship for half a year. And so, in fact, if over the next 10 years we occupy the space station continually with a crew of equal size to what we would send to Mars every other year with half the time spent in space, the total man rems of radiation dose would be the same. We are inflicting the same radiation hazard on our crews in the space station as we would if we had an actual Humans to Mars program, except we're not actually letting them do the work. Okay? Now, finally, look, we have a mission. People are dying because of this space programming because the money could indeed be spent on other things. So that gives us an obligation to actually accomplish our mission. Okay? And that means that the mission needs to come first. We owe it to all those people whose vital interests we are sacrificing by having a space program to do what we say we're going to do. And that's why we got to go to Mars as fast as we can. Thank you.
All right. Feel free to have a seat. That's one of the more interesting arguments I've ever heard, that if we don't go to Mars soon enough, we're going to kill you. But it's interesting. Now, so I'm going to run a couple of questions by you, and then we're going to toss it out to the audience. I'd like you to keep your answers to about 1 minute, if you could. So my first question is, we're talking about we, as if we control everything from this. I know we're in Washington, so everybody in this town thinks they're in charge.
Center of the universe.
The center of the universe, exactly. How do we interact in terms of the private-public sector to do your vision? I'm going to start with Joe because you just finished, Bob. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I think in my opening remarks, I tried to show that, in fact, for 20-plus years, we've been interacting with the public-private sector. There's a lot of carryover between what we do, the multi-billion-dollar commercial space world that we live in nowadays. And I can't remember, there was just another study done of the total value, but everything from, the fact that you use GPS every day now in your cars, the fact that when you buy gas and put your credit card in a pump at the gas station, all your electronic data is passing through satellite networks. All of that commercial investment is being leveraged to put into technologies that we can use to go to Mars.
Okay, if I can stop you there then.
Sure.
Because the spin-off argument's wonderful, but it really doesn't get us to Mars. So in the meantime, let me ask you this. When I say we, all right, because what you're hearing when we say we is spin-offs into the commercial world and contractors. That's the kind of we we're talking about.
Absolutely.
I'm talking about the we that's occurring right now, where you have a couple of billionaires going to Mars.
Can I respond to that?
Absolutely.
I'm just saying that this thing of the idea that you need a billionaire to do that is preposterous. It's been happening for 20-plus years, and there's plenty of commercial investment. We invested a lot of money, I can tell you, into getting electric propulsion ready to go as a company over a long period of years. The idea that now you're going to have somebody come in who has a lot of money and in a few years wave a magic wand and solve the problem that people have been looking at for, what, Bob, 50 years? Mars is hard, guys. Mars is hard. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. It's not like going to the moon. It's one thing to get there. It's another thing to get big masses down on the surface. So I'll believe it when I see it on some of these other things. But I'm not saying I disagree with the idea that those guys go and do that. I'm welcoming them to the club. Let's see them get involved, and we'll see how they do when they get there.
Great. Bob, what is your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, look, until fairly recently, the idea of the private initiative, not just private contractors lending their technical expertise and selling their abilities and technologies to NASA, but actually private initiative getting us to Mars was quite fanciful. Now that has, the ball has been moved on this, one must say, by SpaceX, which has quite literally Sputnik'd NASA, okay? I mean, this is remarkable stuff. They have shown, particularly since around 2009, the ability to develop flight systems at 1/10 the cost and 1/3 the time, as has become accepted as the norm in the aerospace industry. And now they're even doing things that were viewed as impossible in the aerospace industry, such as landing their boosters softly so that they can be reused, at least the first stage, which is the most important part to reuse. So what Elon Musk is doing is lowering the threshold, because, I mean, look, Bush's moon program was killed by the Augustine Commission and the Obama administration because they said, oh, it's going to cost too much. It's going to cost $36 billion to develop a heavy lift booster, and we can never afford that, so this program must be canceled. Okay, now, it turned out now they're developing the booster anyway, but without a moon program to use it for, or anything else to use it for. But be that as it may, Musk went in there, okay, and he said, I'll develop you a heavy lift booster for $2.5 billion. They said, get out of here. You're out of your mind, kid. Get lost. But now that is a credible claim that SpaceX could develop a heavy lift booster for something on that order. That, or in fact, they may even have a heavy lift booster that they've demonstrated before this thing comes on the table. So they're lowering the threshold, because, which is the key thing, because the politicians, there is no principled opposition to humans to Mars. It's not like the Iraq War where there were people against it. It wasn't a matter how much it cost. The only reason why anyone opposes humans to Mars is they say the money could be better spent somewhere else. Well, if the amount of money that needs to be spent is much less, and also if a lot of the development has been done in advance, so the schedule is much faster, and Americans do not like to wait, okay, then this makes it possible. So I think that it is quite possible that the activity that we see at SpaceX could be just the key to leveraging the next administration into launching a Humans to Mars program.
Okay, great. Now, when we get to Mars, and there's been some talk today about biology, things like that, there are going to be people potentially arguing that we have to, don't touch it. Okay, the old Carl Sagan argument of, you know, God's cosmos, it's wonderful, it's amazing, look at it, but don't touch it. How do you feel we're going to be able to deal with that if, let's say, we do find microbial life, some indication of it through some sort of mission that it may occur in parallel or prior to when we get there? How would we deal with that if we want to send humans?
Should we reverse order?
Yeah, go ahead. Bob, you got the mic. What do you both do?
I think we should deal with it with all the consideration that we give microbes here. And I mean, look, let me tell you something. This idea that we don't have the right to settle Mars because there's indigenous inhabitants, microbial though they may be, is political correctness gone berserk. And frankly, I think is an insult to people like Native Americans who were impacted by the advent of the civilizations with more advanced technology and firepower and were therefore displaced, comparing them to microbes. What happened to the native cultures on Earth was a crime because they were people. Okay? Albert Schweitzer went to Africa and killed millions of microbes. We view him as a benefactor of humanity. Adolf Hitler created a feast for billions of bacteria. We view him as evil. Ethics need to be based in humanist ethics, okay? That's how it has to be. And finally, I just don't think there's any possibility whatsoever that we could actually drive Martian microbes into extinction by us showing up there. We haven't actually done that here. And the original inhabitants of the Earth, you know, were microbes who could not breathe oxygen, and so they went underground. They're still there. You know, they've seen them come and go. They've seen the dinosaurs come and go. They've seen the mastodons come and go. They've seen the Wehrmacht come and go.
And your time has come and gone.
And my time has gone. And we can
Bob?
land on Mars. We could settle Mars. And if they were there living in the groundwater, they'd do just fine.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Go ahead.
All right.
Joe?
So a couple of things. There's a two-way planetary protection protocol, as was explained earlier today. So I pretty much agree with Bob's assertion as far as do we care about what happens to the microbes there. Now, I will say this, though. Scientists do care from the standpoint of if there's a second genesis. We need to understand, did all life come from the same source, or did life on Mars arise from a different source? And if we go and pollute it before we know that, that's not a good thing. We can work that out. The more important part of planetary protection is the reverse. What happens if we have a crew that goes, picks up some of these bugs, brings them back, the, you know, whatever movie you want to refer to, Andromeda Strain, sort of thing. And speaking as someone with some Native American roots, I will say that you have to pay some attention to microbial things because there was the matter of those smallpox blankets that were used pretty effectively against the native population here, and with malice aforethought. However, be that as it may, I do believe that, you know, in general, we need to work out a reasonable planetary protection protocol that does not prevent us from sending humans to the surface. And people are working to do that right now. Things like the landing shop workshop that was held this year, that's a big topic of discussion.
Okay, you were talking about a round-trip planetary protection protocol. We're going to come to the audience here in just a moment, but I'm a settlement guy. I'm about going one way. How does that fit into your architecture, Joe? And then Bob?
Okay, so one way. I see settlement being the ultimate goal myself. I think that, like many things, you know, you can use analogies here on Earth. as an example. Explorers go first, they sort of break down the barriers, and then the people who want to settle come after. In terms of the planetary protection, the one other thing I did want to say was I think we can solve a lot of the problems by getting a sample return back to Earth, because if we can look at the regolith, at the soil, and conclude that there is no pervasive, wind-borne, wind-spread microbial element there, that even if it's dormant, could be reactivated through, something like water contact or oxygen contact here on Earth, then that solves a lot of problems. So if we do a Mars sample return mission in the early 20s or mid-20s, we may have that problem licked and we won't have to design for it. So that's a good thing.
I do have a question, I'll give it to you, Bob, but are you considering that we should use a sample return mission to look for microbes as a gating function before we move any further?
I think it's one of the precursor missions that would serve to, it's one of those strategic knowledge gaps that we'd like to knock down with a precursor mission, yes.
Okay, I'd like to actually use the time to rebut some of the comments that Joe just made. Look, the idea of there being red death waiting for us on Mars that we could bring back here to infect the world is fantastical. Pathogens require hosts. There's no macrofauna or macroflora on Mars, so there's no possibility to design the life cycle for a Martian pathogen. Furthermore, the surface of Mars is being subjected to ultraviolet light of an intensity superior to that is used to sterilize places in hospitals and so forth. So there's no microbes on the surface. If there's microbes on Mars, they're living underground in the groundwater. And finally, the final proof that this is pure nonsense is that we actually get samples delivered to us from Mars every year. About 500 kilograms of Martian rocks land on Earth. And to date, no one has been hurt by them except for a dog that was hit by one in Egypt in 1911. Okay, And I have to say, the Alan Hills controversy goes on, but one of the things that came out of that, because of the intensive examination of that rock, was it was established that there were large portions of that rock that were never raised above 40 centigrade during its entire career of ejection from Mars, cruise through space, and landing on Earth. So if there had been microbes in that rock, they would have survived the trip. Okay, so if the red death could come from Mars, they're already here. And this idea of quarantining samples and the immense extra costs that have been added to the Mars sample return by this conceit, so much so that they really are disabling the mission, they're turning the mission into a vision, okay, is complete nonsense. It's like having the customs people search cars for people bringing Canada geese across the border in their trunks in order to prevent Canada geese from infecting the United States. In the meantime, they're flying across by the thousands. Okay, and that's what's going on here. We got thousands and thousands of Martian rocks flying every year and landing on Earth, and they have been doing that for the past 3 billion years. So this is crazy, okay. And the immense costs that have been added and complexity to the Mars sample return, this is disabling to science. And I must say that it's also simply untrue that the sample return would in any way validate that Mars is sterile. You're validating one sample is sterile. So even though the surface is sterile, the Mars sample return wouldn't help establish that in any way whatsoever. So I do not think the Mars sample return is on the critical path of humans to Mars. I think it is of scientific interest, primarily if you're not planning on sending humans to Mars, because if you were, you would gather 100 times more samples selected from thousands of times more candidate samples and do a much better job of it. But even so, if you want to do the sample return, the first thing you need to do is fire everybody in NASA's Planetary Protection Office. Shut it down.
And on that note, we are in Washington. They know what plane you're flying out on. So we are being...
I want to get rid of the EPA, the Department of Education, the Planetary Protection Office, and the Secret Service.
There you go. And we're going to make the Martians pay to build that wall.
Yeah.
So we have an amazing future. We're being flagged. I'm sorry we aren't going to be able to take questions from the audience. I do want to recognize...
No, you got more time. We're going to 8:15.
How much?
We started 15 minutes late.
We're way over.
It's my fault. Blame me.
Boo.
Okay.
It's all right. Good enough.
All right.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it up. I do want to say, Mary Lynn's panel earlier, they were talking about the inspiration, et cetera. I am thrilled to see the Scouts in the room. Absolutely. There will be Space Scouts at some point. Robert Heinlein, I think, wrote about them. And we want to see you guys stay on it, because you're going to be the people stepping off. We're going to make things happen. I was a scout, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. It's going to be a great future. We can make great things happen. It may be the government. It may be the private sector. It'll probably be a combination of both, and all of us going together. We're each going to go in our own ways. We're each going to go for our own reasons. We're each going to go to where we want to go. But we all have to get together and let everybody know that we want to make it happen. Who is the we? This is the we. This is you. It's your future. Make it happen. Thanks for coming.
Let's make America brave again.
Good job. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's right. We're doing that.
Goodbye.